a sense of community when you're free. Rolling through the mountains, rolling through the valley, rolling through paradise with me.
Hello, everyone. Well, it's time for another episode of Small Talk. My guest today is a stand-up comedian. Now, if you've never done stand-up, it is not an easy gig for sure. Ladies and gentlemen, time to meet Cive Lucas. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. This is going to be fun.
Yeah, I hope so. I believe you're in New Brunswick.
Yes, I'm in St. John.
St. John, is that where you live?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Very nice. Yeah.
Yeah.
So on your profile, I love people's profile pictures because they're fun. It says you're just a middle-aged dad working penub in all the wrong places.
Yeah, just some old Saturday Night Live references.
Well, that's so cool. I like that. So when did you start doing stand-up?
3 years ago. Actually, in August, it was 3 years. I've loved it since I can remember. But when my marriage ended, I thought, well, there can't be much of a worse feeling than having a marriage end. So I thought I'd give it I didn't have anything to say before that, but now I had lots to say. So I gave it a try and still doing it now.
Very good. So did you start with an open mic night or just?
I did, yeah. It's mostly open mics and a few paid shows here and there in New Brunswick. There's more and more as we go. Over the last 3 years, it's grown quite a bit. But at the time I started, there was really two main open mics, and they were here in St. John. I worked with one of the guys, and so I was actually scheduled to start while I was still married before COVID hit, and then COVID hit. And so after COVID, I thought, oh, well, I might as well give it another try now. And I think it was not that COVID was good, but that I waited that time because then there was more to what I was going to say than just silliness. Well, it was still silly, but.
Well, you want to make as long as the audience are laughing, that's the whole point, right?
Yeah, and with stand-up, I've watched since I can remember. So I didn't want to just get up and be the guy who was funny at work or the guy who was the class clown and ultimately fail at something I love. So I figured by the time I had something to say, I'd know when it was time to give it a shot. And I think I picked the right time.
Very good. Yeah. So who were some of your idols growing up?
Early on, I would say my very first was Steve Martin. The first comedy recording that I can remember hearing when I was a kid was from the 70s. It was a bit that he has called the Google Phonics Stereo, where he keeps talking about all the things that he wants. He needs a new record player, but every time he thinks of it, he thinks of something new. He had things on it similar on Saturday Night Live at Christmas time. So that started because he was kind of the class clown. When he did stand up, he was goofy and doofy, and that was. But then you had guys like George Carlin and stuff. I had parents who let me watch stand up comedy, and they let me watch Police Academy and things like that when they came out. I was a kid, but they figured the worst I was going to do was swear. So, so what happened was I started learning that the words that these guys like George Carlin was saying, or to a lesser extent for me, was like Richard Pryor was still funny, but not as relatable. But the way they were talking, I realized I could do that. I started being bullied in school, so I started using comedy to be self-deprecating.
Right.
But at the same time, I was watching these shows that a lot of my friends weren't allowed to watch and stuff. So I was using vocabulary that the bullies didn't understand. And at one point they had to pull my mom aside, not the bullies, the principal, and say, when these kids realize what your son is saying, they're going to beat the shit out of them.
Jeez.
It was the 80s. They didn't, the principal, it wasn't zero tolerance. It was like, yeah, let it happen.
Let it happen. Yeah. Let them work it out. Right.
But it was a big piece of self-deprecation. It's still a big part of who I am. I don't, but comedy was, the movie channel years ago was on Saturday nights was stand-up. It was the HBO stand-up was the big thing. Right. And A&E had Evening at the Improv. This was before they had shut-ins and attics, and it was actual entertainment. They had Evening at the Improv, so I was always around it. And then as I grew up around times when you had guys like Sam Kinison come out and Andrew Dice Clay, and I was the right age for them. I look back now and say they're still funny, and I get why I like them, but I start to appreciate comics from that time like Bill Hicks and guys like that had a smarter way of doing it. Now that I'm older, I like their stuff better than I did the stuff when they were coming out.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know for a fact that doing stand-up is not an easy.
No.
The highs are great, but the lows are terrible, right?
Yeah, it's I thought it was going to be a lot harder on myself than it has been. It's been actually a big part of, even while I was married and things, I had a lot of anxiety and depression, all that stuff. And, counselors can help you, but what comedy's done is introduced me to and I have great friends outside of comedy, and I'm still friends with my ex-wife. Like, we ended amicably. So I have good friends outside of comedy, but it was different once I met this whole new group of people and it became a huge part of my mental health, is doing these comedy shows. And at first it was once a month, and now I host shows, and I'm meeting new comedians as they come up, and I'm able to talk to them like comedians talk to me. And like, it's a whole new circle of people, and 99.99% are fantastic people.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And that was one of my dreams, to host comedy nights. I never did. I did stand up, but I never hosted. I think that would be so much fun. Now you perform mostly in St. John?
In around New Brunswick, but I host a show every month here. I host a show in Moncton as well. So it's about an hour and a half from here.
Yeah.
There's shows sometimes in Fredericton that I'll perform at, but like I said, when I started, there was 2 St. John shows. Now we have several small shows, plus a couple of guys are putting on fairly regular ticketed shows. Fredericton's growing, Moncton's growing, and each area has great comedians. So I don't, like, when I put on my shows, I do everything I can to put money in the comedian's pocket, because they're pay what you can shows. That's the big thing in St. John mostly.
Right. Yeah.
And so for the most part, the first few months, I wasn't taking any money from that, because it was getting comedians in the door, and there was no crowds at first. Now that there is, I take a little bit just for advertising. But the point of my shows is to get people seeing how amazing New Brunswick and maritime comedy is. But really, my biggest stuff I see all the time is New Brunswick comedians. And I would put most of them up against the rest of the country for people that would blow people away.
Yeah, I'm from New Brunswick originally, so I understand. There's a certain type of humor, right?
Yeah,
that you don't see
and
anywhere else.
we don't have as much. There is still like, I'm not saying we're a bunch of crazy right wingers. That's definitely not the truth. But we have people, especially in New Brunswick. We've had even comedians come to our shows from Ontario, even Nova Scotia, PEI. They find that we're more willing to make a joke about something that maybe might rub somebody else the wrong way, but we're more liberal in what we're saying when we have an open mic, and because most of us understand we're grown-ups.
Yeah.
And the unwritten rule that I have on my shows is, if there's trouble about your joke, I want you to stand behind your joke. If you're going to say it on stage, you need to stand behind it. To me, there's nothing worse than saying something and then blaming somebody for you saying something stupid. But I also believe you should have the right to stand up there and say something stupid, but the audience has the right to boo you or react how they see fit.
It's interesting when you said booing. Like, to me, that's better than, sometimes you get that dead air effect.
Yeah.
That's the worst. I mean, I would rather be booed.
Yeah. And I've actually had my mom boo me once. That was interesting. One of my best friend in comedy, Michelle, we always tease each other. And she has a joke about, she looks like if Jennifer Lopez were ordered on Wish, that's what she'd look like, because they're the same age. And I made a joke about Michelle's vagina being nicknamed Arnold Schwarzenegger, because nobody's given a shit about it since the 90s.
Oh my God.
And people laugh, but suddenly I heard booing, and I recognized that boo, and it was my mom, because she said, I have to keep you honest. And I don't do a lot of roast jokes, and it's hard to do when you're hosting. And so I said, and I've laughed, but I stood behind it, and I said, I stand behind my joke. It was bad, but and it wasn't as bad as what some people say. But the dead air is worse. But I've had that at the end of a set where I think I'm doing a joke that is done well 99% of the time, and I'll tell it, and suddenly it's quiet, and you don't want to end that way. And it's finding something in the back of your head to say. Mine typically is something along the lines of, wow, that was kind of like a Kanye reception at Temple, wasn't it? And that will usually get, because people are kind of, not that that's shocking, but that jumps them back awake. They laugh, and then I can leave. I don't like to leave to dead air, but
Yeah, for sure. Oh yeah,
it,
at that point, yeah, for
I
sure.
would like you said, I would rather the reaction than dead air. Dead air is worse. Or if somebody like yells out their nonsense opinion, whether it's right or wrong, you're not watching TV. It's not the news there. You can't yell at the people on stage. Just if you're there for a grown-up comedy show, nothing drives me crazier than people now that we don't see it as much. Like, we do have incidents, but people being yelled at on stage for what they're saying, or like you see it more in the States, but the attacks and things like that on comics and everything else, it gets scary. I haven't seen that. I've seen in my Moncton show audience members actually turn and start yelling at people talking in the audience, and like, instead of us having to say something, they turn and just shut the person down. They won't have any of it.
Good, yeah.
And that's when and it's getting the crowd, because some places you need the venue to understand too, though, that when we're doing a comedy show, you shouldn't put it in the middle of somebody's supper.
Yeah.
Music during supper is fine. People telling dick and fart jokes or whatever while you're trying to eat, people, you're not going to get a reception. People are going to be angrier. But if you waited till, give it half an hour after your supper rush, you're still going to have people there. You say, hey, we're going to have a comedy show, or tie something in with it. But when you get people that aren't there for comedy, they're usually the ones that are going to talk through sets, or have very visceral responses, things like that.
Yeah, that happens here. Like if you're in a bar where it's just not set up just only for comedy, people are coming in for just to have a beer or whatever, and you get a lot of that background yak, and it's like, shut up.
And the best things hosts can do, or the comedian on stage, is if it's something that you can tell people are bugged about, address it. But if it's kind of only if people are still laughing and stuff, don't push it, because the worst thing you can do to somebody too is call them out and then have that's when you can get bad reactions. And the last thing you want is, it'd be probably get more people at your next show if there's rumors of brawls, but that might only last one show.
There's a fine line, right?
Exactly. But the biggest thing for me is I want the people that are there for comedy to be entertained. They're going to see different kinds of acts. And I tell people at the start, look, you're going to hear things you really enjoy, things you don't.
Yeah.
If you don't enjoy it, don't respond, but don't scream and holler at the comedian, especially new comedians. Like, don't be booing new comedians. They're trying. And like you said, there is nothing harder than getting on stage in front of strangers and try and make them laugh. It's the only time that I have any confidence in life is when I'm on stage, really. But like, I'll just turn and get up on there, but it takes time to build that. And I still not great. Like, you get somebody call something and you're caught off guard, or if you don't have the audience the way they want them, and somebody does that, it can throw anybody off. I've seen comedians with years and years and years of experience get thrown off by something like that. And people don't realize that we work as hard as a musician does on their art, but the problem is we can't go and do all each other's jokes to fill time. We have to, have new material. We want to keep, and we need the audience to kind of respect that we're trying to work this stuff out, instead of, like, especially at an open mic show, that you want to be the best, but that it might be rough when you hear it at an open mic show. But hey, 2 months when you see it, when you're paying for money to see it, you're going to have a great time at that joke. And you can say, I remember that joke when.
Yeah.
And sometimes we get that with musicians as well. They're working on a song that's completely different from what you heard when the CD comes out. So you have to let, whether it's a comedian, musician, as long as it's not a poet. I don't count poets. They're as art. No, I'm joking. But anybody who's performing on stage has to work on that. If they don't work on it, you can tell right away whatever they're doing. But it's allowing people to have that. Now, if there are comedians that we have them here. We had a guy get on stage at a show and start talking about how women enjoy being raped. He thought it was funny. It was his first time up. I missed this show, but people still talk about it 2.5 years later.
Right.
And And that's not what you want. You want somebody to talk about your set, but not that way.
Yeah.
And there's a line like people did boo them. Other comedians kind of laid in on them once they got up and stuff, but that smoothed it out. But it could go really wrong but you have to have some leeway. But this show doesn't have it. It's called No Jokes Barred. So the intention of that show is to let comedians work on stuff that might be a little bit rougher. But then there's that line, and it was the first time I heard him say, okay, we should maybe close the back door so people walking past don't hear. But the guy probably meant well, but it was I don't know where he would think it was funny to do that, but I don't have his brain. So
at the same time, like I often think you have to know your audience a little bit.
Yeah.
And
if an audience is, sorry.
Well, I was just saying, I've seen some really young comedians come up, and it's all dropping the F-bomb every 2 minutes. And it's like, again, putting women down and stuff. And it's not like they're laughing, but nobody else is laughing. So you got to pay attention, I think, a little bit.
Yeah. Comedians are, some go on autopilot and will just keep going forward. Most will read an audience really well, especially as they go on and on.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes sometimes the comedian on stage might not hear the laughs. Like sometimes if an audience is sitting back, like the worst thing a venue can do is have seats sitting back from the stage. People don't like sitting close to the front.
Yeah.
But if you have these seats back, it's harder for the comedian to hear. And if I don't hear laughter when I'm going, I'll jump into another joke, or if it's continuing, I'll just sit, I'll go to my end and I'll walk off. I don't want to ruin the experience for the audience or the other comedians, but I'll get off and they'll be like, you only did 3 minutes. What's going on? I said, well, the audience wasn't liking it, but they were laughing. But if an audience isn't laughing, I will jump ahead to another joke, but I'll also come off stage and look at my material and say, was it me? Was it the audience?
Yeah.
Because sometimes a joke's going to work in a lot of places, but then you have to look at the face. Like I had a joke that involved sexual dysfunction and Guns N' Roses. And a lot of audiences laughed, but then I told it at a young, with people in their mid-20s, and they didn't hit and I'm like, is it me? Oh, wait, it's young people.
Yeah, they didn't get it. Yeah,
exactly.
Well, the thing is, I'm just thinking about that young comedians, like they don't have the experience also too, right?
They don't, but you'll see a lot of older comedians who start doing their first few sets so that's what a lot of us grew up on, and that's the first things we're thinking of as funny. And especially if I've seen a lot of stand-up comedy and stuff like that, so I know that there's different style. But if that's all somebody knows is what they saw like in the 90s, and they'll go up and start doing that style.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not, especially like you get an older crowd, you might get some laughs, but you're going to get more like, that's kind of rough. But as they go, they realize this doesn't work, but hopefully by listening to other comedians and stuff, they can round that out and turn it into something. Instead of being an awful joke about sexual assault, that comedian comes back and says, well, I know I did wrong, but let me try something else.
Yeah.
And they go and do something else that might work, or they might never do it again. But the comedian has to know the line, but at the same time, an audience has to realize when there's a comedy show, there's very likely going to be something that said that people don't like, unless they're at a daytime show where kids are there. Most comedians have sets for kids and stuff like that. Then there might be issue and venues might tell you can't say things, and that's obviously their prerogative.
Mm-hmm.
But if I'm going to the comedy club here in St. John, Punchlines, it's an over 19 establishment. So I'm expecting over 19 style comedy. So if I go in and people are like, oh, this, there's going to be swearing, not as much as you'd think, especially if you get more seasoned comedians. The more seasoned, the less they swear, because a lot of the times the swearing is what they're using to try and get their brain caught up to them. I say that because that's what I did my first couple of times. I swore a lot because I'd be like, oh, I was trying to memorize my entire set, and then it turned into a lot of swearing because I was trying to catch up. But at the same time, I say odd. I don't swear as much as I say odd things. But in a comedy club, if I'm going to a comedy club, they shouldn't have to put on their adult language or anything else. I should be going in there first with the resources we have at our fingertips. You can research anybody.
Yeah.
You can check out anybody's act. Like there's a comedian from Hamilton named Jason Rouse. He's a hard comedian who will say the stuff that many won't. And he's very funny, but he's not for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And you will get like warnings on posters saying no refunds and things like that. But normally you would just see like, okay, I'm going to go see Mike Dambra. Oh, his stuff's really funny. Oh, he says a couple of things I don't like, but I think I'll like him. I'm going to go see him. If you're paying $20, $30 for a ticket, you're not going to just blindly go see a musician for that money.
No.
Just check who you're going to see.
Right.
There might be stuff you don't realize, or like say a Jeff Dunham. When I really enjoyed him when he first came out as the ventriloquist. But as I watched, like then he did his stand-up, and I'm like, his stand-up is not great, and it's way rougher than I thought it would be, and it felt a little weird laughing at him swearing when he's the puppet guy.
Yeah.
But that's unfair to him, but I still don't enjoy him as much doing his stand-up as the puppets. But it was the shock of hearing him say it. But I wouldn't have said anything out loud at one of his shows going, oh my God,
No.
even if I brought a child, because if it's a night show, there's still a chance.
Right. Yeah.
And very rarely though, like we've performed at a hotel, and one time people brought their kids down, and I was like, this is really weird. Because they were, 10 or 11, but it's the hotel so it was I didn't do well that night because I don't have stuff that in my brain is kid friendly. So I kind of adjusted my jokes, didn't do well, but other comedians didn't, but they brought their kids upstairs. They didn't complain because they realized, oh, hey, but I've had people come up and say, oh, that comedian used the word retarded. And I'm like, okay.
Whoa.
It's a word that it's not a great word to use, but it's not an every other word thing. He said it once. I said, that word's going to come out. There's going to be other words you don't like. There's going to be words that trigger somebody else. I said, I apologize you didn't like it, but you like the rest of the comedy shows? Oh my goodness, yes. And that's the biggest thing, is bring the focus back to the rest of it. If they have a series of complaints, or if 10 or 11 people complain, then there might be an issue with that. Don't use that word at that venue. And I don't like the word. I go out of my way not to use the word, but I used it just in this instance, as it's a word you're still going to hear. It's very much almost out of a lot of the stand-up comedy vernacular.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, it's still one of those words that you're going to hear occasionally.
Yeah, I agree. Like once in a while, stuff like that doesn't offend me. I mean,
No.
My big concern is more that trying to force us to be so politically correct.
Yeah.
You can't be watching every word you say, right?
Yeah. And I've said the word. I try not to, especially when my daughter was born. We have friends that became very good friends of ours. Their twins were in there, and they are one is nonverbal autistic and one is very, very autistic. So I became very aware of that word. Mm-hmm. After meeting and loving these kids. So I try very hard not to use that word but I was also a kid in the 80s and 90s who that word was used for everything. So I think we've done a really good job on that one. Yeah. But I use it because like words like the N-word, you're not going to hear at comedy shows by a bunch of white people very often unless there's hoods involved. Yeah. So really and truly, it's still that word that you're going to hear at a comedy show that people get the most bothered by, but it's bringing a focus back. And it's on the venue to provide like knowledge to the audience that, hey, at the start, come up and say, if you have issues, come talk to us. Don't interrupt the show. Don't do this. It's up to the comedian not to escalate things, because sometimes crowd work is great to calm things down, but at the same time, you can do more damage than good. So it's trying to get the person and the crowd back into the comedy, because really everybody's there to laugh. And the comedian's not there to make people feel like crap. They're there to make people laugh, for the most part. There might be comedians out there who want to make you feel like crap, but really and truly, most of us just do it because it's cheaper than therapy, and it's really great to like hear strangers laugh at something you've been working on or things like that. Like it's the therapy behind it is great, and the comedians on the stage aren't there to upset you, but you might become upset. but it's just rolling with punches. We have to learn as a society that the next joke might be funnier. Or, hey, I'm not behind a computer. I'm not just going to say what I would type on YouTube or Reddit or wherever you're on. Go talk to a manager. That's what we used to do. If you had a problem in a movie theater, you didn't start screaming at the theater. You went and talked to the manager. You know, you talk to a bartender in a bar and say, hey, can I just mention?
Right.
You know, if we're told by a venue, hey, this is what you can and can't do, that's fine. And we'll set those guidelines. And like I said, the goal of my shows or anybody's shows really is not to offend people, but to say things that the comedian has always said things that the average person wants to say but can't. And there's a good way to say things and a bad way to say things. And there's people who can, even comedians who can say what they'd like. And Mark Norman is probably my favorite comedian right now. He's a perfect example. He says things in his new special, all his specials really, but he says things that a lot of comedians would be canceled for, whatever you want to call it. But he is so smart, and the way he delivers and writes is, you laugh so hard and then you realize, oh my God, he's brilliant, because I'm laughing at what another comedian I might have been really angry with.
Oh yeah, it's true, right? How things are said. Yeah.
And
yes.
he does it. It's the delivery. Everything's about delivery. But sorry, I've been just rambling on you.
No problem. No, I just got a notice from Zoom that, you know, we're going to run out of time. So that's, I was a little distracted by that. No, listen, the interview was for you to talk. So that's the whole point, right?
Yeah. I just, when it comes to comedy and stuff, I could talk for hours. It's, to me, the best thing that could ever happen to me in a day is make somebody laugh, whether it's on stage or just in life.
Yeah.
Because for those 10 seconds, if they're having the crappiest day, that laugh might be the best thing that happens to them, whether they know me or not. Because I know that when I was a kid, you'd get, like, my dad worked away a lot, stuff like that. Mom was big on Girl Guides with my sister and stuff. So I'd be home watching movies. And if you were sad, Dad's not there, something, I put in Airplane or Eddie Murphy Raw or Richard Pryor Live on the Sunset Strip, you know, and that brought me from being a sad kid to being a happy kid.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I was also learning in my head things that I could use on bullies or people, just to make people laugh in general. Because, you know, I was, before Carlos Mencia, I was stealing everything. I just wasn't doing it on stage. I was a kid on a playground. So, but it's the best. Comedy can be the best icebreaker in the world, but it can also be the worst. If somebody thinks it's funny and everybody else doesn't, but they keep going, that's where I try not to, I don't drink and get on stage, because that's when I could get into trouble.
Well, we'll end it there, because I don't want Zoom to just shut us down. So just stay on camera for a second. Just to the audience. So you've been listening to Cive Lucas, stand-up comedian, mostly in New Brunswick, by the way. So you can check him out, and he's on Facebook if you want to look him up. Thanks for watching the show, everybody. Take care and peace out.
A sense of community, Chilliwack's a place to be. A sense of community where you're free. Rolling through the mountains, rolling through the valley, rolling through paradise with me. It's multicultural, you're sure to see it all. Chilliwack's the place to be, you'll see. Come party in the park, go dancing after dark. Chilliwack's the place to be, you'll see.